SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft had a terrifying flaw. In May 2024, debris crashed just yards from hikers in North Carolina. While Boeing burns through $2 billion on their failed Starliner, SpaceX made an emergency fix, moving all splashdowns to the Pacific and adding propulsive landing capability. NASA was so impressed, they tripled Dragon's reuse limit to 15 flights, while Boeing got rejected. This is how SpaceX captured 70% of NASA's astronaut missions since 2020. Let's dive right in. When debris from SpaceX's Crew Dragon spacecraft crashed down near hikers in North Carolina last May, it wasn't just a close call, it was a wake-up call. Metal fragments from space, landing half a mile from a popular hiking trail. What if they had landed just 800 yards closer? We'd be talking about casualties, not just damaged equipment. This wasn't some freak accident. It was a fundamental design issue built into Dragon's return system. The problem? Parts of Dragon's trunk, a section that's supposed to completely burn up during reentry, weren't disintegrating as planned. They were surviving the fiery plunge through our atmosphere and raining down on populated areas. Why does this matter so much? Because SpaceX has become NASA's primary ride to space. Since 2020, they've handled over 70% of NASA's astronaut flights to the International Space Station. With that kind of responsibility, even a small design flaw becomes a massive safety concern. So what caused pieces of Dragon to survive when they should have been incinerated? And why did SpaceX choose such a dramatic solution as moving their entire recovery operation across the country? To understand the problem, we need to understand how Dragon returns from space. Think of Dragon as having two main parts, the capsule and the trunk. The capsule is like an armored car, protected by a heat shield, designed to carry astronauts safely through the inferno of reentry. The trunk? It's more like a disposable backpack that carries solar panels and radiators. Here's the critical part. The trunk was never meant to come home in one piece. SpaceX designed it to be discarded in space and burn up in Earth's atmosphere. Nature's incinerator taking care of the trash. But herein lies the engineering challenge. SpaceX built the trunk too well. Made from advanced materials designed to withstand the harsh conditions of space, parts of it were proving tough enough to survive re-entry temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot enough to melt steel, but not Dragon's trunk. Sarah Walker, SpaceX's director of Dragon Mission Management, didn't mince words. After 5 years of splashing down off the coast of Florida, we've decided to shift Dragon recovery operations back to the West Coast. That sentence might sound innocent enough, but it signals an emergency-level response to a potentially catastrophic situation. But why would moving splash zones fix a problem with burning debris? Let's break down what actually happens during re-entry. After Dragon undocks from the International Space Station orbiting 250 miles above Earth, it needs to slow down from 17,500 miles per hour, 25 times faster than the speed of sound. Dragon first performs a de-orbit burn using its Draco thrusters, slowing just enough to begin falling back to Earth. Then at approximately 100 to 120 kilometers above Earth's surface, Dragon separates from its trunk. The main capsule, protected by its heat shield, continues its controlled descent. The trunk, meanwhile, is supposed to be completely incinerated by the extreme temperatures of re-entry. That's the theory, at least. But here's what actually happened on May 22, 2024. Staff at the Glamping Collective Resort in North Carolina discovered large metal fragments. Experts later confirmed they came from the trunk of SpaceX's Crew 7 mission. These pieces survived their fiery descent and landed just half a mile from a popular hiking trail. It was pure luck that no one was injured or killed. But luck isn't a safety protocol, and SpaceX knew it couldn't gamble with human lives. What makes this situation even more precarious? The debris didn't fall in empty wilderness. It fell near populated areas in the eastern United States, where nearly 50% of Americans live. The risk wasn't theoretical anymore. It had become terrifyingly real. How would you solve this problem if you were Elon Musk? Would you completely redesign the trunk, potentially delaying critical missions? Or would you find a more immediate solution? SpaceX chose to act fast with a two-pronged approach. First, they implemented an immediate but temporary fix. They stopped placing retired science equipment and other large items from the ISS into Dragon's trunk. These extra components were increasing the chances that more debris could survive re-entry. But the real game changer? SpaceX completely relocated their splashdown operations from the East Coast to the West Coast, specifically targeting waters near Point Nemo in the Pacific Ocean. Point Nemo isn't just any ocean location. It's known as the spacecraft graveyard, the most remote place on Earth, farther from land than any other point on our planet. At this oceanic pole of inaccessibility, SpaceX could ensure that any debris would land far from human populations. But how exactly does changing the landing site prevent debris from falling on populated areas? This is where SpaceX implemented a crucial software change. Sarah Walker explained, "We'll implement a software change so the deorbit burn happens before we jettison the trunk, just like we did back with Dragon 1. This subtle but significant modification means that instead of separating the trunk while still above populated areas, Dragon now keeps its trunk attached until both are on a trajectory directly targeting Point Nemo. Only then does separation occur, ensuring any surviving debris falls into the uninhabited Pacific, not people's backyards." The first mission to implement this new approach was Crew 10, launched in March 2025. 4 NASA astronauts were sent to the ISS for approximately 6 months, with their return scheduled for September, making a Pacific splashdown rather than the previously standard Atlantic recovery. But wait, if this solution works so well, why wasn't it implemented from the beginning? And what other upgrades has SpaceX been quietly developing while Boeing struggles to get their competing spacecraft off the ground? While moving splashdown locations addresses the debris problem, SpaceX wasn't content with just fixing one issue. They've been pushing Dragon to its limits with even more radical upgrades, specifically to its landing systems. On September 27 last year, SpaceX unveiled perhaps their most ambitious safety feature yet. In case of parachute failure, Dragon can now rely on its built-in Super Draco engines to perform a propulsive landing. Think about what this means. If all 4 main parachutes failed during descent, which would be catastrophic for any other spacecraft, Dragon could still save its crew by firing its engines at the last moment. It could land like a helicopter rather than crashing into the ocean. This isn't entirely new technology. Dragon was originally designed to land using engines alone more than a decade ago, but SpaceX shelved the concept in favor of parachutes. Now they've brought it back as a backup system, creating redundancy where none existed before. The numbers behind this system are staggering. Dragon is equipped with 8 Super Draco engines arranged in 4 pairs around the capsule. Each engine produces about 16,000 pounds of thrust. That's 71 kilonewtons in a vacuum. To put that in perspective, the smaller Draco thrusters used for orbital maneuvers produce only around 90 pounds of thrust. That's less than 1% of the power. This gives Dragon the ability to perform a quick, engine-powered landing if all else fails. A safety feature no other spacecraft in operation has. These engines aren't just powerful, they're hypergolic, meaning they ignite on contact between fuel and oxidizer, providing instant thrust when needed most. These upgrades are scheduled to debut on Dragon C213, the 5th and final Crew Dragon ever built by SpaceX. It's set to fly its first mission in Q2 of 2025 as part of Axiom Mission 4, possibly as soon as next month. But this propulsive landing capability carries another fascinating implication. SpaceX originally developed this technology with Mars in mind, part of a proposed mission called Red Dragon. Mars has a much thinner atmosphere compared to Earth, making parachutes far less effective. In the Red Dragon concept, propulsive landing was the primary method of touching down on the Martian surface. While that specific mission was shelved in favor of the larger Starship program, the technology has now come full circle, becoming a critical safety feature for Earth operations. Is this just a coincidence? Or is SpaceX still keeping one eye on Mars while revolutionizing space travel here at home? While SpaceX has been rapidly advancing Dragon's capabilities, their competitor Boeing has been stuck in a cycle of delays and setbacks with their Starliner spacecraft. The contrast couldn't be more striking. Since 2020, SpaceX has completed 11 successful crewed missions to the International Space Station. Boeing, They haven't completed a single crewed mission to the ISS. Not one. The saga of Starliner has been marked by one disappointment after another. Boeing's first attempt at launching Starliner in 2019 ended in failure. It took another 2 years before they managed a second test flight. And even though that mission successfully docked with the ISS and completed most testing objectives, NASA still required Boeing to fix several critical issues, including problems with valves in the spacecraft's propulsion system. The financial impact has been devastating. As of February 2025, Boeing has reported over $2 billion in additional losses related to Starliner, an astronomical sum that raises serious questions about their program's future. But here's where NASA's rejection becomes crystal clear. 2 astronauts on the recent Crew 9 mission, Sunita Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, were originally scheduled to return from the ISS aboard Boeing's Starliner. But due to ongoing technical issues, NASA made the unprecedented decision to call on SpaceX instead. Let that sink in. NASA pulled their astronauts from Boeing's spacecraft and gave them to SpaceX instead. There's no clearer vote of no confidence than that. What does it say when NASA won't trust their own astronauts to Boeing's spacecraft, a company with over a century of aerospace experience? And how did SpaceX manage to outperform them so dramatically? The funding disparity between the two companies makes this story even more remarkable. In 2014, when NASA selected both SpaceX and Boeing to build new crew transportation systems, Boeing received $4.2 billion, while SpaceX was awarded just $2.6 billion. That's a $1.6 billion advantage for Boeing, 61% more funding for essentially the same task. The reason? Boeing's decades of experience in aerospace gave them credibility that SpaceX, then a relatively young company, didn't have. But experience and money aren't everything. Through relentless innovation and a willingness to adapt quickly to challenges, SpaceX not only completed development ahead of their more experienced rival, but has now established themselves as NASA's most reliable partner for human spaceflight. By 2023, while Boeing was still struggling with basic functionality, SpaceX was making over $8 billion annually with more than $500 million in net profit. They had transformed from underdog to industry leader in less than a decade. This David versus Goliath story reveals a fundamental truth about innovation. Sometimes a fresh perspective can overcome decades of established practices. SpaceX's willingness to rapidly iterate, test boundaries, and implement emergency solutions when needed has given them an edge that Boeing's traditional aerospace approach simply couldn't match. The story of Dragon's emergency upgrades isn't just about fixing a technical flaw. It's about a fundamental shift in how we approach spaceflight safety. SpaceX has proven that quick adaptation and innovative thinking can solve problems that seemed insurmountable. As NASA continues to rely more heavily on SpaceX for its most critical missions, explicitly rejecting Boeing when astronaut lives are on the line, one question remains: can Boeing ever catch up? Or has SpaceX's revolutionary approach permanently changed the landscape of human spaceflight? The story of SpaceX's Dragon and Boeing's Starliner isn't just about 2 competing spacecraft, it's about 2 fundamentally different approaches to innovation. When faced with a potentially deadly design flaw, SpaceX didn't hide or delay. They pivoted, adapted, and emerged stronger. Meanwhile, Boeing, with all its resources and experience, remains grounded. This contrast reveals something profound about our future in space. Success doesn't always come from having the biggest budget or the longest history. Sometimes it comes from being willing to admit when something isn't working and having the courage to fix it. As we look toward more ambitious goals, returning to the moon, landing on Mars, and beyond, which approach do you think will get us there? The careful, methodical legacy of companies like Boeing? Or the rapid innovation and problem-solving spirit of companies like SpaceX? Perhaps the answer isn't either or, but a new synthesis of both. If you're fascinated by space technology and the companies shaping our cosmic future, hit that subscribe button and join our journey through the stars. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious, if you were an astronaut, which company would you trust with your life? This is Space Core, where we make space make sense.